When the international human rights system was put in place at the United Nations after the Second World War, the goal was to prevent mass atrocities such as the Holocaust from ever happening again. The post-war slogan was "Never Again." Never again was the sentiment that inspired the post-war international human rights system. Never again will the international community stand idly by and allow the mass extermination of people simply because of their race, ethnicity, nationality, or religion. The genocides and mass killings that have occurred since the Holocaust, such as the Cambodian genocide in the 1970s and the Rwandan genocide in the 1990s, are a reminder that the international community has failed to meet this goal of preventing genocide that it set after the Second World War. In this class, we will examine genocides as gross human rights violations and explore the emergence of human rights standards and instruments in response to these atrocities as crimes against humanity. Genocide is the deliberate and systematic destruction, in whole or in part, of an ethnic, racial, religious, or national group. The 1948 United Nations Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide defines genocide as any acts committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group, such as killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction, in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. The word genocide comes from the Greek word genus, connoting race, tribe, or species, and the Latin suffix "cide," meaning killing. The word genocide entered usage in the 1940s, but the concept of mass killing based on political and social identities dates back thousands of years. The Polish Jewish lawyer Raphael Lemkin coined the term genocide because he regarded the term mass murder in use at the time as grossly inadequate to describe the gravity of the crime. He felt it failed to account for the motive of the crime, which arose solely from racial, national, and religious consideration and had nothing to do with the conduct of war. Another United Nations instrument or law that addresses mass atrocities is the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment. This United Nations Convention aims to prevent torture around the world. The convention requires countries to take effective measures to prevent torture within their borders and forbids countries from returning people to their home country if there is reason to believe that they will be tortured in their home countries. The Holocaust had a direct effect on the international consensus to establish and universalize human rights protections against mass atrocities. In the course of the Second World War, the Nazis executed a deliberate program of exterminating over 6 million European Jews as part of what the Nazis called the final solution of the Jewish question. Legislation to remove Jews from civil society were enacted years before the outbreak of war. Concentration camps were established in which inmates were used as slave labor until they died of exhaustion or disease. Jews, Roma, and other minorities considered undesirable were crammed into ghettos such as the Warsaw Ghetto before being transported hundreds of miles by freight train to extermination camps and gas chambers. In Auschwitz alone, over 1 million people were killed. Other groups persecuted and killed included minority groups such as the Roma, Soviet civilians and prisoners of war, ethnic Poles, the disabled, gay men, and those considered political and religious opponents of the government. One of the most egregious violations of human rights in the period after the Second World War was the Cambodian genocide. In the aftermath of its seizure of Phnom Penh, the Cambodian capital, in 1975, the Khmer Rouge revolutionary movement declared the establishment of democratic Kampuchea. By cutting Cambodia off from the rest of the world, the Khmer Rouge regime inhibited international awareness of the devastation in that country, and thus the years of the Cambodian genocide did not attract as much international attention as they should have, especially after the atrocities of the Holocaust. In the course of a massive restructuring of Cambodian society, almost 2 million Cambodians died, out of a total population of about 7 million. That is about 15% of the entire country's population. Like the Holocaust, much of the outside world did not know about the atrocities being committed by the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia until it was too late. Pol Pot, the leader of the Khmer Rouge regime, embarked on a total collectivization of Cambodian society that mobilized the population into an unpaid labor force in the rice fields, which became known as the killing fields. Much of the over 1 million Cambodians who died in these fields died from overwork, starvation, disease, or execution. Among the human rights abuses were summary executions of so-called traitors of the revolution. The Communist Party's interrogation center in Phnom Penh, which has now been preserved as a human rights museum in Cambodia, was the venue of over 20,000 executions. The Khmer Rouge continued their murderous rule in Cambodia until 1978, when the Vietnamese attacked Cambodia and overthrew the regime of Pol Pot. Another horrific mass atrocity of the 20th century was the Rwandan genocide. A good deal has been written about the circumstances that led to the genocide, which include issues of political upheaval, ethnic polarization, incitement, and militarization that led to the genocide. Historical tensions between two major ethnic groups in Rwanda, the Hutu and the Tutsis, intensified in the 1990s with the rise of Hutu extremists who promoted an ethnic nationalist ideology that they called Hutu power, and by opposing military campaigns by the Tutsis. Competition for political power and economic resources between the majority Hutu ethnic groups and the minority Tutsis took a violent turn in the 1990s. Radical Hutu extremists promoted a final solution to what they considered Tutsis' threat to Hutu ethnic dominance. The assassination of a president who led a Hutu government unleashed a wave of genocidal killings of both Tutsis and moderate Hutus, orchestrated mainly by the Hutu majority government. An estimated 1 million Rwandans were killed within a short 3-month period in 1994, constituting up to 70% of the country's Tutsi population. The mass killings of a unprecedented scale were carried out by government-backed ethnic militias, but also by ordinary citizens. Political and military leaders promoted genocide as a means of securing their political power. In circumstances reminiscent of Nazi Germany, ordinary Hutus responded to state-promoted racist and ethnic incitement and propaganda that portrayed the Tutsis as treacherous and subhuman. In the aftermath of the Rwandan genocide, there were recriminations about the failure of the international community to prevent the genocide, and specifically the failure of the United Nations Assistance Mission to Rwanda, which was charged with peacekeeping in that country. Despite appeals from the United Nations Force Commander in Rwanda, the Canadian Lieutenant General Romeo Dallaire, the world's major powers limited their intervention in Rwanda to diplomatic protests, minimal peacekeeping measures, and evacuating their own citizens from the troubled country. This lack of effective international response is significant from a human rights standpoint. International human rights emerged in the aftermath of the Second World War as a response to the Holocaust and the atrocities of war. The Rwandan genocide in the 1990s demonstrated that 5 decades after the Holocaust, the international community had not done enough to prevent such mass atrocities from happening again. Since the Rwandan genocide, there have been other mass atrocities of genocidal proportions around the world. During the Bosnia-Herzegovina War in the 1990s, there was widespread ethnic cleansing where large numbers of Bosnian Muslims and Bosnian Croats were expelled and forced to flee their homes by Bosnian Serbs. Bosnian Croats and Bosnian Muslims also conducted similar acts against ethnic opponents. In 2004, the attention of the international community was drawn to allegations of genocide being committed by the government of Sudan in its war with rebel groups demanding national and regional autonomy in Darfur. To address genocides and other crimes against humanity, the international community came together in 2002 to establish the International Criminal Court in The Hague. The International Criminal Court, also known as the ICC, has jurisdiction to prosecute individuals for the international crimes of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and crimes of aggression. While the International Criminal Court has made some progress in successfully prosecuting some political and military leaders for war crimes, it has also faced accusations for focusing too much on human rights violators in the global south and not enough on human rights violators in rich Western countries. In the 20th century, more human beings have been killed or allowed to die by deliberate human decisions than ever before in human history. Technological advances such as the development of nuclear weapons made it possible for humans to inflict carnage and violence on each other on an unprecedented scale. Some estimates put the figure of people killed by famine, war, systematic genocide in the 20th century at over 200 million people. Sadly, given current trends in wars and conflicts around the world, this 21st century might well turn out to be even worse than the previous century. The atrocities of the Second World War and the Holocaust prompted international resolve to prevent such events from ever happening again. However, human rights mechanisms have not lived up to these expectations. They have not prevented mass killings by state and non-state actors. International law and humanitarian intervention have had very limited effect on preventing mass atrocities and genocides. The task of fashioning human rights standards and instituting enforcement mechanisms that will adequately address the crimes of genocide and prevent them from happening again, therefore remains a task that remains to be done.